everyone. Good evening and welcome to tonight's webinar, which is all about college application essays, how to write some really great ones. My name is Kathy Hart.
And I'm Ellen Valladares.
And we are going to be your co-presenters for tonight's presentation. All right, so let's go ahead and we will get started. So you are likely watching us on either our Facebook or our YouTube live pages. And of course, we are making a recording of our webinar, and that'll be available within a couple of days of tonight's presentation. So if you miss anything, you want to go back and watch certain sections, we'll have it ready for your viewing within a few days. As always, we have some downloads available for this webinar, and you can go to scorewebinars.com. You should see the links for those below tonight's webinar's description. You don't need to have this information in front of you in order to follow along with the webinar, but it'll just give you a few tips about the college essay, about testing, about what colleges look for in high school students to help you as you start your college application journey. So we've got a pretty big agenda this evening, lots of good information to share with you. We'll be talking about the role of application essays in college admissions. We will be looking at two different types of college essays tonight. The personal statement, that'll be our primary focus, but we'll also touch upon supplemental essays, which are additional essays that are specific to those colleges on your list. We'll talk about those later in the presentation. We'll give you some tips on how to start. We'll go through some do's and don'ts that will be helpful as you're working through the revision process. And then we're going to share some great essays that work to hope inspire you to start your own essays. Just a little bit of housekeeping. You can put your questions in the chat feature, and we will be keeping an eye on the chat throughout the presentation. So we'll try to answer those questions live as they appear. And if we don't get to them, we'll answer them at the end of the evening. And of course, we'll provide our emails. If that way you have any follow-up questions, you can reach out and connect with us. So on my screen here, you can see the top 10 most important factors in college admission. The first three, so academics and testing, that makes up the academic review of a college application. Then, of course, you have extracurriculars, involvement, leadership. And then rounding out that top five are well-written essays. There's been a lot of talk about the test optional landscape in college admissions. We indeed had several webinars on this very same subject. And of course, if you're choosing to submit an application to a college without test scores, those well-written essays are going to bump up just a little bit higher on that list there. And regardless of test optional submitting testing, we hear from college admissions officers frequently that those essays are used to really round out the student's application. So a little bit of terminology and definitions before we talk more about getting started on the actual application essay writing. So let's talk about the Common Application or the Common App. So if you're a rising senior in tonight's audience, chances are you probably have already created a Common App account. If you haven't, I invite you to do so. It only takes a few minutes. You go to commonapp.org and sign up there. You'll be using the Common App to apply to over 1,000 colleges. You're not going to be applying to all 1,000 of them. You can only apply to up to 20, but almost every well-known university is on the Common App, including the 8 Ivy League schools, over 20 of our Florida private universities, and all 12 of our Florida state universities. Colleges that you won't see on the Common App are going to be MIT, Georgetown, the University of California schools, and the Cal State schools. They have their own application platforms with their own application writing requirements. But for the most part, you're going to be using the Common App for probably a few of your applications. And so we're going to be focusing on the Common App and its essays throughout the evening. So let's talk about the personal statement. And this is another term that you'll hear Ellen and I use the terms personal statement, personal essay, college essay, Common App essay interchangeably throughout tonight's presentation. So what are we talking about? We're talking about the response to the primary essay question on the application. So this is the main essay. If you have a Common App account and you click on that central Common App tab, you can find the writing section of on that. You can find the writing section, and that's where your personal statement is going to be added in order to submit it to the colleges to which you're applying. Ultimately, the personal statement is going to live up to its name. It is personal. It gives you, the student, an opportunity to share a story from your life experience that's going to help round out that application. It allows colleges to hear your voice, to learn more about your personality, to understand your values. And it really helps set you apart from others because there is no one else in this world like you who can tell your story from your perspective and your experience. On my screen here, you will see the 7 Common App personal statement prompts. You'll also find those on that Common App writing page I just referred to. And there are 7 choices. Choice number 7 is great because it allows you to share an essay on any topic of your choice. This is a popular selection for many students who might have a great personal narrative but find it doesn't fit in perfectly with choices 1 through 6. Now, I'm not going to read through all of these prompts, but I just want to talk a little bit about prompts 1 and 2, just so you can get an understanding of how these prompts are formulated. So number 1 says, some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that is so meaningful they believe their application would be incomplete without it. If this sounds like you, then please share your story. So again, if you're a rising senior sitting in the audience tonight, you can think, okay, I certainly have a background and identity. I definitely have interests. Likely you have a talent as well too. This can be a great starting point for coming up with some ideas to write your personal statement. Let's look at prompt number 2. The lessons we take from obstacles we encounter can be fundamental to later success. Recount a time when you faced a challenge, setback, or failure. How did it affect you, and what did you learn from the experience? So this is another opportunity to write about a life experience, except for now it's framed with a challenge. Things don't always go well in our worlds, but it matters less about what happened to us and more about how we lived through the experience, what we learned, and how we grew. And you can see choices 3 through 6 are going to elaborate on some of those different ideas introduced in points 1 and 2. And you're going to notice on the bottom of my screen, Common App has a limit for that personal essay, that main essay, and it is 650 words. I promise you, you cannot add 651. One more word, you'll get a little flag there in the system, and you'll need to reduce that word count. You're also cannot write or submit an essay with fewer than 250 words. And we usually recommend students to aim for a range of 500 to 600 words. That gives students the opportunity to really tell a story and reflect on it. Yes, admissions officers are reading the essays, and they definitely will say that they use them to make that admissions decision. In certain circumstances, it might be a powerful tipper. It might help students get into college. But even more importantly than that, it really allows the students to share their voice, their authentic experiences with the people reading their admission application. So it's definitely an important part of your application. Now, what's great about a personal essay is there is freedom when it comes to writing your essay. And this is what I love about the Common App personal essay, is that it's not like any writing you have probably done in a high school English class. For a number of years, I was a classroom English teacher. I taught AP Lang was one of my classes. And so I know when I was teaching students how to write an essay for the AP Lang exam, it was very structured. There was a certain formula, there was a rubric, there had to be a thesis statement, there had to be textual evidence. Those aren't required with your personal essay. It's creative writing as is at its best, which can sometimes make it a little scary because I'm not having to write about the Revolutionary War or analyze a character in a particular novel. So, really, what I want to spend time on, I, the student writer, is coming up with a topic that really captures who I am. But this can be difficult in and of itself. And I'm sure some students are, or maybe you're nodding your heads and saying, oh my gosh, yes, it is hard to get started. How do I get started? So, the first step that you want to take, and I think this step is so fundamental in writing this type of essay. I would argue that this step is fundamental to any type of writing, but certainly when you're working on your Common App personal statement, is brainstorming. It's just getting started with reflecting on some moments from your life and seeing if you find maybe one or two of them that really captures who you are. So, of course, you are going to start with something about you. And you want to take your time to brainstorm a variety of ideas. In just a moment, I'm going to lead you through some possible brainstorming ideas, brainstorming topics. So, write down any ideas that might come forth while you're listening. And certainly, it's helpful to bounce ideas off parents, friends, teachers, college counselors. Sometimes talking through the ideas can help as well too. Now, don't have someone else tell you what to write. That won't lead to a great college essay, but certainly speaking those ideas out loud and then writing them down so you don't forget them can be very helpful. All right. So where can I come up with some ideas? So these are some points that we like to use with our students to help generate ideas if they come in and they don't know what to write about. I always like to start with looking around your own room or whatever space you're seated in this evening. What do you see on your walls? What's in some of your drawers? Which pet is sitting on your bed this evening? If I were at home, I would have a cat probably crawling around across my screen. What are some of those stories associated with those familiar items that you see? What about a moment that changed you? So maybe looking at some of those activities that you have listed on perhaps your resume or your Common App activities list. Your essay is not going to be a regurgitation of your entire resume, but maybe there's a moment from an experience that changed you. Something you know a lot about. Colleges love to see intellectual curiosity. What do you really find yourself fascinated by? What about when something didn't go perfectly or your biggest failure? Thinking back to that prompt number 2, what happens when you've experienced a setback? What does that look like? How do you deal with it? What have you learned as a result? What's something cool or interesting or unusual about you? We've had some students write essays about their hair or their height. These can make really interesting topics, or at least very interesting starting points for your essay. What about one of your core values and a story that's associated with it? Are you the funniest kid? Are you the kindest kid? Are you the most thoughtful? Are you the most curious? What did one of those personality traits or values say about you? What about recipes or just creation in general? I've read many great essays from students who have written about building something, designing something, drawing something, cooking something. And it's, of course, using that moment to kind of go into a student's values, their personality, what they've learned, what is their life philosophy. What do you think about before you fall asleep? What's that idea that always runs through your head? Turning back to the room that you're sitting in this evening, what's the view out your window? I'm sitting here, a thunderstorm just passed by my office. I can see the trees, I can see some rain, I can see some buildings going up behind our office. Any stories associated with that view? Tough decisions, right? Going back to some of those challenges. The word that won't go away. Do you have a favorite word that kind of lingers in the back of your head? How did that word come up? Where did it come from? Where's it taking you? What about the best gift you've ever received? The fourth prompt selection has to do with gratitude and writing about a moment of gratitude and how it affected you. Maybe start with a gift. Favorite time of day, week, month, year, season. Again, going back to that curiosity, that intellectual curiosity. What are you always looking up online, whether it's Google or AI? What do you like to learn more about? What about a favorite song, book, or movie? These can be great starting points to a personal statement. And indeed, these can also show up in what we call those supplemental essays. So those are the additional essays that are asked by colleges. So even if this doesn't frame a personal statement, you might end up listing a series of books that you've read, or journals, or podcasts, or songs that you enjoy. A scary experience. What about a fond childhood memory? Sometimes it helps to go back to one of those core memories, right? Those memories from early childhood. And you'll find out as you think about it, it's less about the actual experience itself, but what you carried with you from that early experience. The world that shaped you. You're part of a community. How has that influenced you? Now, once you have your idea, start writing. And I would say if you're taking a couple of these points, if some of them sparked a couple ideas, write them down right now. Open up your notes on your phone, grab a piece of paper from your kitchen counter, and just try to take the pressure off yourself, because the topic itself matters less than sharing more about who you are. Now, I'm going to point out the writing process, or remind you of the writing process, because this is essential, especially as you're writing this first college essay. And indeed, most students usually start with that personal essay, that main essay, that one that's a story about them. And it's good to go through the writing process carefully while working on this, because this is what's really going to help make a great essay. So once you've come up with your topic or idea, just start jotting down everything. So you want to write down all the moments that you can recall from your story. I always tell students, don't worry if it seems like a tiny, insignificant detail. Just write it down. Just get it out there. And then there's always a second part, because you're not just telling a story for the sake of telling a story. It's an opportunity to reflect, to talk about what you've learned, show how you've grown, show those positive personal attributes that are going to that will come through on your essay. So think about, why am I sharing this story? Why does it matter? What did I learn? So you have all your your brainstorming in place, and now you want to silence your inner editor and just write that rough draft. I always tell students, do not worry if your rough draft is 1,000 words and a single paragraph. Just get those ideas down there. And don't worry about it not sounding good at the outset, because it won't. Your essay won't sound great, at least that first draft. That's where the revision process comes in. And this is so important. We always tell students that your college essay, especially that first one, is going to be about a 3 to even 8 draft process. And you're going to see as you go through and you're revising and you're taking things out and you're adding things in, how the essay really takes shape and comes to life. Once your essay is close to finish, then of course you always want to go through and proofread, looking for those little teeny tiny things that you may have missed while focusing more on the actual story and reflection itself. This is one of my favorite tools to use. I use it with my own writing as well, is to read the essay out loud, and that'll help your eye catch, that'll help you catch any errors that your eye missed. And I sometimes find it's helpful periodically, even if you're in an early draft, to just read parts of the essay out loud. And again, that can be helpful when you're perhaps deciding, what do I want to leave? What do I want to take out? Start the process early because this will take time. Not too many students write personal narratives in high school classes, so this might be your first time writing this sort of essay. So definitely start the process early. It is July when we are doing this presentation live, so would definitely like for you to consider this your invitation to get started with your essay, of course, after you view this webinar. All right, so I'm going to take a pause here and I'm going to put myself on mute, and then Ellen is going to take over and she's going to share some great do's and don'ts as you're working through your writing and then revision process.
Thank you, Kathy. And those were like amazing tips. I'm even learning things listening to you. And we've read a lot of essays and work with a lot of students. So getting started with the do's and don'ts, some of the essay do's. Okay, we kind of, Kathy talked about this, and you're going to hear us reiterate this because it's really the most important thing to remember, that the personal essay is about you, and to keep it personal. We've heard from many admissions officers who read these essays, and the main thing that they really want to, that they look for in an essay is the authenticity. They want to hear your voice, right? They don't want it to be mom or dad's voice. They want to hear your voice. They want to hear that you've thought deeply about yourself. And that's a big thing that came up recently with a lot of experts that we heard from, that really want to hear that you have reflected. So this self-reflection. So whatever you're telling about yourself, that has to come through in your story, that you've really reflected about why you're telling the story and how you've grown and who you've transformed into how you see the world. Those are the most important things. Next slide. So do use a conversational tone. This is important. I think Kathy touched upon this. It's not an English paper. This is not an AP Lit paper. It's more akin to like a blog, say. And so it's going to be a conversational tone. You could think of it as if you're doing an interview with somebody, or talking or telling a story to somebody. It's that. And in that respect, there's some things that are allowed in this essay that maybe wouldn't be allowed, or everything is really allowed. There are no rules, although we're going to give you some do's and don'ts. But it's a little bit more natural storytelling, and you can use contractions. And so it's told the way you would speak. And you want it to be still, even though it's conversational, we're going to write it, also as a professional essay, like they're saying, not quite your diary, not filled with slang, like we're going to mention that later. But anyway, so that's that. Next slide. And do keep your focus narrow. So Kathy kind of touched on that too, that we want to kind of bring it to a specific story or an anecdote, right, about your life. If you get too broad, you're really going to lose your reader. You have to remember that these people reading your essays are reading hundreds, maybe thousands of essays, and they've read so many essays. And so you want to engage them. And if you're too broad and too general, you're going to lose them. And it's amazing how wonderful essays are that focus on little details. There was one several years ago, I remember, that was a famous essay that was the Costco essay. And so somebody just focused on their experience in Costco from being a toddler to growing up. And so they were really focusing on this little slice of life about their experiences in Costco, but then saying how those things related in their life. You have to bring it around to you. I've seen things as narrow as somebody talking about shoelaces or things. So you can come up with very narrow metaphors or ideas, but that will definitely keep it more interesting. And I think that's it. Next slide. And again, it's going to be the details that make it come to life. So think about vivid details and being descriptive. I want to say recently I was talking to one of my students, and we were talking about baseball, and I was saying, how does it feel, to, if you're going to write about, he was a pitcher, and he's like, oh, well, that's joyful. I said, okay, but think about being more descriptive, and think about, like, if you were writing a movie scene, or you're watching, you know, watching as a fly on the wall, and you have to talk about everything that you see around you, the colors, the feeling, the air. And all of a sudden he started to say, okay, I stand on the mound. I have to focus on my catcher. My catcher gives me a signal, and I can either shake him off or what. And I'm like, yes, those are the kind, I'm like nerd out on it. Tell me about being, all those nerd out baseball. That's what I want to hear. So always think about drilling into the detail, creating that movie scene and bringing those details to life. And we're going to give you some examples of how that's done in essays. So next slide. So here's an idea of like how you might bring something to life. So like on this slide, the boring generic line says, I like to be surrounded by people with a variety of backgrounds and interests. So that's pretty general, right? How about this? Much better. That night, I sang the theme song from Casablanca with a baseball coach who thinks he's bogey, discussed Marxism with a little old lady, and heard more than I ever wanted to know about some woman's gallbladder operation. Great detail. So just, detail, detail, detail. Now, a lot of these things may come out as you revise. Remember, this is going to go through many drafts. But it's things to go back and look at your first drafts and say, maybe this is a little generic. Where can I improve that? And think about some of these things. Next slide. And again, here's another example of something kind of general and generic and cliche. I want to help people. Ooh, everybody says that in their essays. I have gotten so much out of life through the love and guidance of my family. I feel that many individuals have not been as fortunate. Therefore, I would like to expand the lives of others. A lot of students probably write that. And I've probably, helped them with essays that have said that in the end. But here's something much better. My mom and dad stood on plenty of sidelines till their shoes filled with water, or their fingers turned white, or somebody's golden retriever signed his name in mud on their coats. Their kind of commitment is what I'd like to bring to working with fourth graders. So just think about how much more colorful that is and how much that says about wanting to help people. Next slide. So what we're kind of talking about too is showing and not telling. And this is a hard thing. I'm an author, writer forever, and it's one of the things I have had to learn, and I'm still learning the difference between showing and telling. But here's a good example. It took a while for me to get used to all the fancy lab equipment. Okay, that's a good one. So how could we show that better? Scales, test tubes, beakers, and Bunsen burners. I felt at first like my slightest breath would set off some chain reaction. So already think of that, lab equipment, that was very generic and a little bit boring, right? But as soon as you said test tubes, beakers, and Bunsen burners, your imagination is lighting up and it engages the reader. So the showing is just really, again, using those specific details to bring it to life. And right, telling informs and showing engages, and you can see the difference. And again, we want them to enjoy reading our essays, and so that's where we need to bring some color. And again, that happens in your revisions. You can always go back and add some of these details. So do answer the question. Kathy showed you a lot of the prompts for the Common App and for the personal statement. If you do pick one of the prompts, that has a specific question, you better make sure to check your essay and make sure that it is definitely answering that essay and all that prompt and all parts of that prompt. My favorite suggestion to students a lot of times is to use that number 7, which is kind of right about anything that you want. And so you're not answering a specific prompt, but a lot of times you might have a story that fits a prompt, and then that's great. And if that calls to you, you do that, but do make sure you're doing it. This also is most important on the supplemental essays. So those essays that the colleges are asking specifically about them and why you want to go to their college, really it's important that you make sure that you're answering the question that they've asked and every part of the question. If there's two parts, make sure you're answering that part of every part of the question as well. Do vary sentence structure. So this again goes more to the little writing details, right? So, and again, this can come in on revising. If you want to take a picture of this, it's a great screenshot to keep in your phone to kind of refer to when you're writing. Transitions are very important. I find students, a lot of times have a difficult time with kind of making those transitions. So these are some great words, whether it's between sentences or between paragraphs. And again, those can be fixed in revisions, but it's important. We don't want every sentence to start with I. A lot of times, I did this, I did that, or when. So going back and reviewing and trying to vary up how you're starting your sentences and using these transitions to connect your different ideas are very important. Okay, then there's the passive voice and the active voice. And what's the difference? The active voice is going to be shorter, more direct, and it's the verb, it's bringing it to life, again, like the details. So a passive voice says, for instance, the tray of food was dropped by the waiter. And it's kind of like in past tense, right? The waiter dropped the tray of food, splat. You can almost hear that happening, right? So think about using always the active, more engaging wording in your essays. The hook. Okay, this is very important. We want to talk about beginnings and endings. And I feel like a lot of you probably have heard about the importance of hooks in essays. Again, it's true that a lot of these readers are reading a lot of essays, so we want to pull them in as best as we can. Something I want to share with you is a few years ago, I read a blog by an admissions officer that reads essays. And I was a little bit heartbroken because he said that he was honest. He was being honest. And he said, I read the first paragraph and I read the last paragraph. And if those capture my attention, then I'll go back and read the whole essay. So yeah, that broke my heart because there's so much hard work that goes into the whole essay. But it also just emphasizes how important it is for you to have a hook, an opening paragraph that really catches the attention, and also a conclusion that wraps it up, which we'll talk about in a second. So you want to create, mystery, intrigue. You don't want to give away the whole story. Another thing I want to say, I'm going to read these couple examples here. A way that I like to sometimes have my students start is with an anecdote or a story. And it's really important to know that your essay does not have to start at the beginning of the story. So I want to emphasize that. So you don't have to start when I was 2 years old. Please don't even start like that. So, and I just see somebody popped up with the question, should the essay be written in present tense? So that really all depends. There's so many different, it depends on the story that you're telling. And if the story was in past tense, it might be in past tense. So it really depends. You can tell in present tense, you can tell in past tense. And maybe Kathy will add more to that later. But when you're telling a story at the beginning, it might be in the middle of your story. It might be that, you're telling a story about having the responsibility of driving the car, but maybe you start with getting pulled over and I was there and the cop was at my window and sweat was dripping down my brow as my brow as he took out his pad and pen, to give me a ticket. And this is not the beginning or the end. And then maybe you come back and say, I'll never forget the first day that I got my license and how I promised my parents, So just remember, it doesn't have to be the very beginning to begin with. But we do, and what, like when you're asking me about the tense, there's so much, like Kathy says, freedom in how you write things. So in these examples of hooks, just notice like they're not full sentences. There's question marks, there's exclamations. We have, different ways of presenting them. So there's definitely some freedom to, to play with. So the first one says, Brendy's ice cream, Casale Italian pizza, Doris's supermarket, Haagen-Dazs. Was it age discrimination? No one would talk to me. And just a single interview, but without a callback. Only 15, no car, but I desperately wanted to work. So again, like I said, look at those little staccato mentions of the places that the person applied to, obviously, but it definitely gets my attention and I want to know what happened. Did you get a job or what was the lesson in this? The next one, every photographer remembers her first camera, just as a musician remembers her very first instrument, or a golfer, her first set of clubs. Mine, a baby blue Sony point and shoot that could fit in one of my hands. That's just beautiful because it's so descriptive. It sets up, I want to, that we're going to hear that she's a photographer, but it really kind of does set up kind of beautiful writing, first of all, and also the intrigue of what more she's going to tell me about her first camera and becoming a photographer. Okay, next. And another idea is some short and sweet openings, right? So we're talking about being very descriptive, but also this is very attention getting, so some of these lines, like my favorite science project was a complete failure. What a great opening. That gets your attention. No more seltzer water for me. That's a good one. I love seltzer water. So I want to know, like, how would somebody not drink seltzer water? I had a student who their opening line was, when I grow up, I want to be a mermaid. So that was a great one. And she went on to talk about how she is like a mermaid in many ways. And that was something she actually presented in career day when she was in kindergarten. But it's a great essay about that and makes a great point. So, okay, next slide. And back to the conclusion. So just, the conclusion, as I said, is just as important. So for instance, the what you can do when you're concluding is go back to your beginning. What you don't want to do is summarize. What you do want to do is kind of maybe circle back, especially if you've used a metaphor. For instance, my student that said, when I grow up, I want to be a mermaid, was her opening, and her final line was, I am a mermaid. So it tied back into it, and it was kind of a powerful kind of exclamation point on the whole point that she made throughout her essay. So you do want to have, like, make it impactful and have a long lasting impression, and make sure that you are communicating something about the message that you've been saying about yourself in that final. And here's an example. I contend that it's with imagination, thinking about infinity and solving Rubik's cubes, that I further my passion and obsession with problems. Sure, I can crack Erno's code in a few seconds, but his glowing multicolored influence will remain with me for a lifetime. Here, you try. So very cute. And this is about Rubik's cubes. Obviously, I know from not even reading the beginning of this, right, that he was talking, or she or they, talking about Rubik's cubes and how they compare that to them being a problem solver and enjoying, having a passion for solving puzzles and problems. And the one thing you don't want to do is summarize. So not like in the English paper, where you're going to say, in conclusion, blah, 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 blah. That's not what you want to do. Again, it's more of, it's almost just like the hook, a powerful thing that's attention getting and leaves you with a powerful punch and an impact. And the conclusions sometimes are really hard, Okay, I also want to mention that the conclusion and the hook, don't feel like you're going to get those on your first draft, your second draft, or your third draft even. A lot of times, like Kathy said, we just, write that, vomit out all that, your first draft, get it all out there, and it's not going to have that hook, and it's not going to have, and a lot of times what I find is I'll find the hook buried down in paragraph number 7 or word number 500 or whatever. And like, I'll say, oh my God, that's wonderful. Bring that up here and we can use that for a hook, so you never know. So it's a lot like fishing for where the hook is. And the conclusion, I'm telling you, you will end up playing with those over and over again and fine tuning until you really get those. So that really comes into the revision process. So don't worry about getting that right away. Now, those were the do's, even though I think we did some don'ts within the do's, but here are some don'ts. And before we start into the don'ts too, I want to say a big do is do enjoy this process, right? Like this should be fun. Like you're talking about yourself, and this shouldn't be, I'm going to say, don't make it too painful. Do make it, enjoyable, because it should be fun. If you're struggling writing about something and it's really painful, I would ball it up and start again. And believe me, you can go through many topics, but it should be something that's kind of easy for you to write about it because it's you and it's personal. Even though I know it's hard to write about yourself and talk about yourself, ultimately it should be easy because it's something that you know. Okay, the don'ts. So don't tell them what you think they want to hear. This is important in your personal essay and in the supplemental essays. So many students, worry about that and spend too much time worrying about that. Well, is this what the colleges, want to hear from me? What if I say this? Don't think, again, they just want to hear your voice. They want to hear an authentic story about you and to know who you are. Also, you don't have to do any flattery or tell them things, you're the best university, charm them. That's okay. They'll see right through that. So be yourself and don't try to second guess what they need to hear or want to hear. Don't be cynical or condescending. So this comes up, I think, in several essays, that I've had. And it's not anything that anybody does on purpose, but you may want to give your essay a sensitivity reading. Like, don't compare yourself to your peers. Like, I'm thinking examples are, unlike my peers who were playing video games all day, I had my nose in my books or whatever, which is very cliche. Don't use those cliches. But so don't compare yourself to your peers, because you're kind of, in saying that, you're kind of putting other people down. And don't generalize and use, sweeping generalizations about groups. And, today especially, there's a lot of sensitivity out there. So you have to look at, not being offensive. And I think generally you know how to do that. Next slide. Don't write your resume into your essay. So this is very important. Your personal essay, like we said, is going to be more narrow and focus in on more of a story or a certain aspect. And so you don't want to just give a laundry list. And again, I don't know if we've said this, but the essay is the place where they are learning something about you that they can't find anywhere else in your application. So it's not your scores, it's not your grades, and it's not your resume or your activity list, which does show up in your application. So for example, don't write this. During my junior year, I played first singles on the tennis team, served on the student council, maintained a B+ average, traveled to France, and worked at a cheese factory. All those things are in the activities list. So I don't need to regurgitate them in my essay. And I'm going to put the readers to sleep with that. There may be some things to narrow in on there, but I don't want to just regurgitate those kinds of things. Oh, and don't mention your GPA or your test scores, and try not to, I like to shy away from, for students saying, I was president of this or team captain of this, unless it really weaves into your story. You want to be really humble in the way that you talk about your accomplishments. There are other places to brag about your accomplishments in the activity section, and in your resume. Here, you're going to be a little more humble. And don't tell the story of your life. Again, we're saying narrow it down. So you're giving a glimpse and the details. Again, we're focusing on that. So essays about your family or the trip to France, extracurriculars, they're all good if you focus in and get specific, like you talk about a single Christmas Eve, or like it's a meal of boiled tongue in Strasbourg, or one shift of scooping ice cream at Sloan's. I want to mention also there are a few kinds of things we often say, like maybe you want to think about avoiding, or if you're going to tackle it, make sure they are very focused and specific. So there are some that come up often, like students write about mission trips very often, and it ends up to kind of be the same story. If you can write about a very specific slice within that mission trip that really impacted you, then do that. But if it's just kind of, I went to this country and it changed my life because I saw people who were less fortunate than me, that story is been told a little bit, too many times. And so you might want to think of how you can make that more focused and specific. If you're going to talk about sports or athletics, there's a very common story of, I overcame this, or I, everything, and then I finally won this championship. So think about really narrowing in on something. And listen, if sports is your thing, that's a great thing to write about. Like, my baseball player, it's part of who you are if you've spent so much time, but you have to really narrow it in and focus on those little slices of life. And again, while we're kind of telling you two things, we're saying be descriptive and add a lot of vivid words, but at the same time, a good message is going to be clear and concise and not too verbose. And so not using too many words. So there's ways. And again, this can come in the editing process. So eliminate, there's a lot of unnecessary words. So, for instance, if you said in society today, you can change it to now. So these are things proofreading can help you with, or, anybody editing. Here's an example of too many words. I love this example, actually. Over the years, it has been pointed out to me by my parents, friends, and teachers, and I have even noticed this about myself as well, that I'm not the neatest person in the world. When you could have just said, I'm a slob. So that would save you so many more words. When you have only 650 words and every word really needs to count and every sentence needs to count, I'm a slob is powerful there. So so think about that. And then there's some things like, some phrases like we as humans, I don't know, we all say these things, but we as we, who else would we be, right? We are humans. So be interesting. We've kind of gone over all this. Just the other part of this is don't try to go on the other side of things to try to be so interesting that you overdo and be a little too much to impress, because then you're going to lose the reader as well. Don't overshare. So this is important because there's this really balance that you have to find between being vulnerable and authentic, but yet not sharing things that are a little too sensitive that might make somebody uncomfortable. So we do encourage you, to share personal things, but not get overly personal, and don't overshare. And if you ever are in doubt of that, you can run it by your parents or a teacher or even your friends, and take the test and somebody says. But also what I want to mention with this that's really important when you're talking about, a lot of these essays deal with overcoming something, right? So, and not everybody has that story, but some people do. And so they talk about what happened to them, and then how they came through it and how that transformed them. But we kind of say the rule for that is, don't spend the whole essay in describing all the terrible things that happened. We want to say about 1/3 of the essay should be about, oh, this terrible thing happened. And then 2/3 of the essay is going to be, but I came out of it because I learned this and this and this specific stories about who I am now because of these things. So just keep that in mind. We really don't want to overshare all the negative. It's really focusing mostly on your reflection and how you grew and how you face that adversity and those things. Okay, I think that's it. Okay, and back to cliches. So if you don't know what I mean by a cliche, these are some great some great examples of cliches that, again, on your proofreading of your essay, that maybe you want to go back. And again, some of these are hard. They, especially in some of the supplementals, they make their way into the essays, and we have to kind of weed them out. But there are ways we're going to show you. There's kind of some alternate ways to say some things, but maybe take some pictures of these too, because it's good to look back and say, oh, whoops, I said this. Like, I can make a difference. Everybody says that. We all say that when we're talking about our extracurricular activities, because why did you do it? You really did want to make a difference. But maybe we can think of some better ways of saying that. Here's some other ones, like I no longer take such and such for granted. I realize the value of hard work and perseverance. Yeah, that's probably in every essay. Okay, next slide. And readers know, yeah, that's it. So here's just an example of maybe how you can improve something like this. So an example of maybe a cliche that this comes up. As I finished the race, I realized I had learned the value of hard work and appreciated the fact that I could accomplish anything if I set my mind to it. So here's an example of how we might fix that up if we were going to make it sound a little bit more descriptive and less cliche. The finish line was a buzz of body types, short, tall, skinny, and fat, all sharing a sentiment that glued us together. We had done it. We had conquered our own doubts. Mine were left behind somewhere in the dust. So again, it's that showing who you are. It's showing and not telling, but it's also just thinking about those cliches and trying to get more specific with the details. But this is my favorite one. That summer in New York truly broadened my horizons. That one is in every essay as well, every supplemental, broadened my horizons, and a lot of the personal essays. And this is a great example of saying it in a better way. Street corner falafel, Hebrew national hot dogs, ramen noodles, endless choices that sprawled across lower Manhattan. For a moment, I became a New Yorker with a bit of everywhere in my blood. I can like smell being on the street in New York, like with those descriptions, how great that is. And so much better than New York truly broadened my horizons. So again, those things are things to look at on your revisions. Okay, don't use a thesaurus. So this is important. We said, that you need to use your own voice, and it shouldn't sound like anybody else wrote it. But also, think about the words. Don't go looking up and putting in big words just to be impressive. And especially so when my son did this like 10 years ago, he was working with somebody helping him with the essays, and me being a writer, I looked at his essay and it had all these big words. And I was like, do you know what this means? He said, no. And so that comes out of your essay. If you don't know what it means, please don't use it. Even if you've looked up the meaning, then you know what it means. So if you have an elevated vocabulary, then use that. And if you know how to use it, but otherwise, simple can be best, because again, it's conversational. We don't talk normally in those kinds of words, right? So good writers use the best words, not the biggest words. I'm going to remember that. And here's one also, just again, when you're overreading, when you're reading over and proofreading and going over your essay after it's written, again, I agree with Kathy. Reading your essay out loud is one of the best things you can do. It'll catch errors. It'll tell you whether it's in your voice and it sounds like you. And it's also going to help you see repetitive words, because a lot of times what you'll find is a sentence that says, I took the opportunity and then I gained this opportunity. And then your next sentence says opportunity again. And once you read it out loud, you go, oh, So you have to go back and say, okay, I got to change some of those opportunities. Um, Look out for phrases like I wanted to, I planned to, I was able to. Again, just repetitive words and things that might be overused again and again and again. And don't use slang in your essays, even though it's conversational, it is not a text. So don't, get too slangy with it. You are presumably having an adult reader, so use words that they will don't use words that they won't understand. I do love when kids use words specific to maybe something that they're passionate about. Like I said, geek out on baseball, and there's words like that, but not such slangy things. And be careful with words that show up like really, very, a lot, cool, awesome. Like those can be kind of sliced out on your revisions as well. Oh, contractions. That's so important. So many times, I don't know why, but students, are a little bit resistant sometimes to using contractions. I guess because it's been drilled into you to not use contractions. But in this personal essay and in your supplemental essays, it's absolutely okay and encouraged to create that conversational tone to use contractions. Think about it. If it feels right to say it that way, then put it in. Sometimes you wouldn't speak like, I would not speak like that. I wouldn't speak like that. So, give it the talk test. And lastly, on my end, and then Kathy's going to talk more, of course, these are obviously obvious. Don't plagiarize, pick up somebody's essay that they used before. Don't purchase essays. Don't have somebody else write an essay for you. Kathy and I help students with essays, but we would never write an essay for you. So mom or dad or teachers can guide you and proofread and offer advice, but not write for you. And definitely, again, the admissions officers have read so many of these. They know when it's not you writing it, and they know if it's AI writing it. So on to our next. With that, I will pass it on to Kathy to follow up about ChatGPT.
All right. Thanks, Ellen. Great tips. I feel like I'm learning as well too. It's fun learning, bouncing ideas and learning from each other. So what about ChatGPT? So of course, this is part of the landscape, not only in college admissions, but in education in general. So just to be aware of a few things about AI, and we're talking about use ChatGPT. I think it's probably the most commonly used platform, but AI written essays, if you've ever tried writing an essay using AI, or rather asked AI to write you an essay, you're going to notice they do not sound like a high school student. There are words in there that students don't even know the meaning of. They don't sound like a high school student. They just do not make for good essays, the long and the short of it. Some colleges are using AI detection tools, some aren't. Again, it's pretty self-evident at this point if a student did use ChatGPT to write an essay, in part because it just lacks that voice. It sounds pretty flat and canned. You'll see a lot of those cliches and generalizations that Ellen was showing you how to avoid. Using AI, just be aware, is to generate your essay is considered plagiarism. And at the end of the day, colleges want to hear your story. And hopefully at this point in our presentation, you can see a number of ways in which you can really infuse your personality, your experience, those details from your life in so many different ways. Now, of course, ChatGPT AI can be used as a tool ethically. And I'm just going to direct you to an article that we wrote on our blog about a year ago. So just ahead of when ChatGPT really kind of popped onto the scene there. And it gives some great tips on using ChatGPT to help brainstorm ideas. We talked about earlier when I was discussing brainstorming, sometimes it's helpful to share ideas, talk about ideas back and forth. But sometimes you might not have a person in your life that you are comfortable sharing those ideas with. And in this instance, you might be able to bounce some ideas off of ChatGPT or AI. So I invite you to scan in this QR code and you can read this article later at your leisure. A few other things to avoid is just to not recycle an essay unless it fits another prompt. This will pertain mainly to those supplemental essays. Many college-specific questions are going to be unique to that college, but some, in certain instances, are going to ask you to describe a meaningful extracurricular activity. Ellen is going to read a couple samples of those essays a little later on. So that's okay in that instance, that you don't have to write a brand new meaningful extracurricular activity for two colleges that request it. And of course, your personal statement, that's going to be your universal essay. That's going to be shared with all of the colleges on your list. Just a few final tips about proofreading. Don't rely on your computer's spell checker. It can certainly miss words that are spelled correctly, but are not the correct meaning. If you are writing two different Why This School essays and you're using a similar framework, just make sure before you send your Yale essay that you removed a reference to Harvard or vice versa. If you take away one thing from tonight's webinar, let this be your one thing. High school is never, ever, ever one word. Google Docs will not give you that little squiggle line there, that red line. It will not catch it. It will allow you to write high school as one word as much as you want. Do not do this. High school is always two words. So let that be your key takeaway for tonight's presentation, in addition to all the great tips that we've given you. And don't forget, the essay is about you. So you can imagine if Ellen and I had both worked on our personal statements and we dropped them on the hallway of our high school and our teachers picked them up, that they would know, oh yeah, this is an essay that only Ellen could have written, and this is definitely Kathy's essay. So just make sure, again, by providing those personal details, that narrow focus, you're really going to have an essay that's not only well written, memorable, but also strongly pertains to you. What are colleges looking for? Essays that are communicating, this is who I am, this is what I want, sharing more about you, the student, and your goals in detail. It'll help make the application come to life. So it's going to share something that might not otherwise appear or might not be elaborated on in other parts of the application, in particular that activities list. And of course, it's going to be genuine, not over packaged, written sincerely, using appropriate vocabulary. All right, so now we're going to read a few essays that work. So the first two essays I'm going to read are going to be personal essays, so those longer Common App essays. Then Ellen is going to read one personal essay and then three supplemental essays. And then I'm going to come back and discuss a little bit more about supplemental essays, since the majority of tonight's presentation has focused on the personal essay, that longer essay. All right, so I'm going to read this first one here. And this is a great example of a student who used a moment from her resume, but elaborated on it in such a way that you wouldn't get these pieces of information from an activities list. And it has a really cute metaphor. It has some ducklings. So I was 7 when I first began to fly. No, not in an airplane or in my imagination. 7 is when I joined the cheer squad. Interestingly, I've always associated that time in my life with ducklings. I remember sitting in the back of my mom's car on the way to my first cheer practice, barely able to peer out the side window when I spotted the family of ducklings in a scraggly patch of grass adjacent to a small pond. While others might not have noticed the tiny creatures, I was fascinated. A stagnant pond on the side of the highway seemed a difficult environment for ducklings to survive. Yet, I observed over the weeks and months that they did. What's more, the ducks managed to thrive and return to that pond each spring. Curiously, I began to think there were aspects of my life that were mirrored in the ducks. Ducklings hop before they fly. They have to dare and they have to persevere. My cheerleading career began in a gym with a specific teaching method. Never was I praised for my attempts at new flying skills. Instead, I was reprimanded for not mastering moves more quickly. Hopping brought me little encouragement. I must have attempted a back tuck thousands of times before I could do it consistently. Even when I landed the move, my coach ordered, "Do it again." My coaches often barked at my team to do 100 push ups. While most of my teammates completed a few push ups and walked away, I stayed. I was always the one left on the floor, pushing myself past my own limits. Never did I dare cheat myself out of a single push up. Despite this environment, I continued to learn the skills to become a flyer. The girl at the top of the pyramid, balancing on one leg, smile on my face. Like the ducklings, I had to take risks. In order to fly, I was never afraid to fall. Even as I got older and we began doing more advanced moves like basket tosses, where I was thrown 10 or 20 feet into the air, I wasn't afraid to fall. I rely on my teammates to hold me up to catch me. We communicate well with each other, sharing muscle memory and trust. What I have always been afraid of is letting down my teammates. We all work hard and we didn't often win. Not that first year, not other years either. For years we didn't win. Would I have liked more medals? Yes. But I keep coming back like the ducks. Were there other factors apart from cheer that helped shape my development and goals? Certainly. My family's values, my early Montessori education, 3 enduring childhood friendships, my high school science classes, and my internships. But cheer has been consistently present. Now I find myself in new roles. For example, I'm a mentor to younger cheer team members and the coordinator of a customer service at work. At 4 or 5 months of age, after learning to fly, young ducks must undertake a long migration. Now the same is true for me, but I know where I want to go, what's right for me. My wings are strong. I'm ready to fly. So again, hopefully you could hear in that. That's a great use of that reoccurring image of the ducklings. All right. For this essay, this is another personal essay, personal statement. I'm just going to read the opening and closing, what Ellen was talking about earlier, how you can really take what you give yourself in your beginning and use it to wrap up your essay in the conclusion really nicely. So I'm just going to read the 2 paragraphs of this essay, and you can probably determine what is in the middle. All right. In the swell of the waves 50 yards away from me, the infamous midnight blue sail chased my bait in hot pursuit. The sailfish hesitantly circled the bait, then went for the strike. As my cork viciously jerked up and down, the crew and captain exclaimed, "Let it eat!" I nervously decided to set the hook, but unfortunately missed the bite. What went wrong in those few seconds? I simply didn't let it eat. I grew impatient instead of waiting for the fish to fully eat the bait. For the rest of that day, "Let it eat" played over and over again in my thoughts. A few days later, at the first tournament of the year, I found myself in the same situation. I watched a sailfish strike the same way as the other had, and this time the phrase, "let it eat," reminded me to be patient. I let the fish fully eat, and 20 minutes later, we were up 1 sailfish. Now the concluding paragraph. Fishing has influenced me to become more patient and knowledgeable overall. Countless hours waiting have trained me to be patient throughout life, whether it be school, hobbies, or personal issues. The virtue of patience is helpful in many ways, and I feel blessed to have adopted this trait at a young age. Additionally, fishing has given me the experience in trial and error and has forced me to pay attention to detail. Finally, this sport has taught me that in life, many times the best way to solve a problem requires experimentation and to let it eat. All right, so I'm going to switch over to Ellen, and she's going to share a few other examples.
Yeah, so the one I'm going to share also is I'm going to share mostly the opening and the beginning too. And I think like what Kathy just shared, you learned so much from the beginning and the opening, and I'll tell you what I love about this essay, but also it's a very good metaphor. Back when I was a chubby, glowing little girl, I was enchanted by a wooden-shaped sorting cube that included 3-dimensional stars, hearts, cubes, and circles. It was a toddler's game made to improve shape recognition, dexterity, and matching skills, a toy that proved to be fun and intellectual. Although it was a fairly simple game, my 3-year-old self could never figure it out. Frustrated beyond relief, I tried to put the heart in the star-shaped outline or the circle in the square time and time again. I remember my mom patiently grabbing the right shape, putting it in my hand, and bringing it to its proper outline while saying, "Heart goes with heart, star goes with star, circle with circle, and square and square." Confused by her statement, I would cry out, "But why? Why?" And she would always answer, "Because that's where it fits." Eventually, I learned to put the heart in the heart, outline the star, and so on. But the same question stayed with me, pulsing in the back of my head. Why? So she kind of goes on to talk about, why do people have to fit into a certain group? And through that, she talks about her Venezuelan roots, but being born in the United States. And so I learned a lot about her through this metaphor. And I also learned that she has this kind of philosophy, right? Then the final paragraph is, so whenever I remember the wooden shape sorting toy, I remind myself that just because other people need to put shapes in their proper places, I don't have to. I don't have to conform to other people's expectations because I get to choose where my bar is set. Because even back then, when my mother wasn't watching, I would keep trying to put the heart in the star, the circle in the square. In the end, I would always open the lid and put all of the shapes inside the cube, looking down with satisfaction at the vibrant blue circles, the red squares, the yellow stars, the red hearts, all mixed with one another without judgment, without bias, shaping one another and filling the cube to its brim. So I love that it's also a very visual metaphor, and it's just a great metaphor. We all kind of know that shape sorting toy, and it was a great story to outline and tell us about her. So now we want to highlight a few supplementals that we were kind of talking. We kind of alluded to a little bit, the extra essays, and Kathy's going to talk a little bit more about it before we end to just touch on briefly. But here's an example. So one of the popular essays that you might be asked is to write about an extracurricular. So this one, somebody wrote about their extracurricular. There is a heart that beats with every movement that is made. Every catch has a release, everything a certain weight. This is natural to us when we examine and interact with the tangible world, but when the world is constructed by the imagination, it's not as obvious. Such is the mental exercise of pantomime. From the Greek pantomimus, imitating all, pantomime is an ancient form of performance and a craft I've been honing for 4 years now. It is complete nonverbal storytelling, excluding even the mouthing of words. This makes pantomime a universal art. I've performed a pantomime about the famous Kiss on VJ Day photograph, another about the technology impacting familial connection, like the heartbeat that is embedded in the style of movement. Boundless heart pours into each performance. Pantomime, the way I've experienced, is the zenith of the creative process. Weeks are spent in conversation, incubating an idea. Translating the idea is turning words into invisible objects and silent emotion, pushing past the facade of language and into the raw reality of expression. From there, it's fine-tuning. Don't walk through that table. Make sure you actually swallow that drink. It's ensuring that every emotion is clear and real. Pantomime is a syzygy of carefully selected movement, music, and expression that creates a holistic and speechless work of art. Of all my dramatic endeavors, pantomime has been uniquely rewarding because every component of the composition is dripping with my own creative juices. I am connected to the art form as a whole and the power vested in communication that is unbound by the coils of language. I find even now that I'm failing to truly capture the beauty of pantomime. It's a remarkable irony to fall short of imitating an art that is grounded in expression. So why I like that one is that, first of all, I want to mention this is a student that had kind of an elevated vocabulary and put some bigger words in there, but it's very descriptive, but also very practical and shows what they did and why they were so passionate about what they did and what they got from it. And so you learn about that the person loves the creative process and so on. Okay, so that's important there. Then we have, this is a good example of many times you're going to be asked, sometimes the hardest essays are the short essays. So this, somebody had to write about their extracurricular of theater in only 100 words. So then every word has to really count, right? I step out from behind the curtain and the hot stage lights shine down on my skin. Palms sweat, legs tremble. Then the world around me slowly slips away. It is a rush like no other, standing on stage seconds before performing. The excitement continues. When I rehearse for a show or study voice, every single time I forget the world and focus solely on theater. Theater serves as an outlet for self-expression and a means to leap into an uncharted world. My voice becomes a powerful tool. Life without theater is unimaginable. I will always seek opportunities to perform. Those were two performing arts ones. Um, and then finally, this is a sample of a why this college essay, which a lot of colleges will have this essay, and you have to get very specific. Again, like what Kathy was saying, you can't be just general about, um, intellectual, I love your intellectually curious, students and your academic rigor. You have to really dig into the details, and that takes a little research. It takes going on virtual tours or actual tours. Anyway, so here's an example of why BU, Boston University. The BU experience includes an interesting detail: Shelton Hall's top floor study lounge. This glass-paneled spot with views over the Boston skyline is reputedly the home of Eugene O'Neill's ghost. What irony! A literary genius constantly surveying students stressed over finals or finishing editing their fifth, hopefully final draft of an English essay. Spirits aside, what's truly intriguing is how the sum total of the BU experience guides students on a path to solve tomorrow's problems. I want to major in neuroscience. BU combines the fundamentals I need with in-depth exploration of neurobiology through the CAS program. As I grow in the field, BU's modern facilities and technology will continuously provide research geared towards a variety of advancements, from extending regenerative medicine to establishing a stronger presence of health ethics in the medical community. CSN develops new treatments for neurodegenerative diseases, providing a great segue from my research at FSU. By analyzing diseases on multiple levels, I'll explore and extend the capabilities of the human brain. But wait, there's BU's snowboarding and ski club, the perfect opportunity for this Floridian to jump outside his comfort zone and develop new skills. From mastering beginner slopes to shredding Casper Bowl in BU SBC's collaborative environment, I'll make new friends whose warmth and camaraderie will combat the Boston cold. It's not just a campus, but it's a campus rich in history. So I'll immerse myself in my Beantown life as a terrier and as a special breed of problem solver. That's a really good one. Yep. And now back to Kathy.
All right. Thank you, Ellen. All right. So now I'm going to talk just briefly upon supplemental essays, and then we'll be wrapping up tonight's presentation. Thanks for sticking with us. So this is, you'll see this on the Common App, the second page of that main writing section, where you are given an option to discuss the impact that something such as COVID-19 or other natural disasters may have had on your health, your education, your family, etc. I promise you that this essay is truly 100% optional. You can check no, you don't have to think about it, you can move on and continue writing all those many other essays that you may have to write. Just to be aware, it's here, it exists, but there's no obligation to write this one. However, you will be writing, perhaps for certain colleges on your list, some other supplemental essays. Now, where can you find the prompts? They are usually released in August and September. Common App goes live for our current seniors, so class of 2025, on August 1st. And you should be able to see the college's specific questions either in their questions page or on their supplement if they should have one. You can also, if you're done with your personal statement and you're ready to get started on some of those college-specific essay questions before the August 1 rollover, you can often find the current or the upcoming year's prompts. So for the 2024-2025 cycle, on the college admissions websites, many times on their admissions blogs. Sometimes they'll also release them on social media, so give them a follow, Instagram, Facebook, etc. And these are some of the popular ones. Ellen read the extracurricular activities ones. Those show up quite frequently. Why do you want to attend our college? Why have you selected your major? Why do you want to major in that particular field at our university? So those are pretty common. Also, these diversity focused questions are showing up with much more frequency. And these will ask students questions about community or background or identity. Also, other questions will ask you, other colleges will ask you questions in which they're determining your intellectual engagement, your intellectual interest. Why do you want to study what you want to study? What do you like to do outside of the classroom related to academics? What are your top 5 books? So those questions are also pretty common on the Common App, on the college's own pages. And Ellen already touched upon this, and I'm sure you heard the specificity in the BU essay that she read, but just making sure to avoid any empty generic statements. Colleges already know that they have a beautiful campus, world-renowned faculty, and they know what their ranking is on US News. I promise you that. So dig deep, spend time, do your research to write those supplemental essays. And now we're coming to the end of tonight's presentation. And of course, if you enjoyed spending the evening with us, we welcome you to reach out if you'd like some help with getting started with your college essays. I'll just highlight a couple of upcoming programs. We do have our annual College Admissions Bootcamp. It's held at Suncoast High School, which is a local high school here in Palm Beach County, Florida, where we're based. You don't have to be a Suncoast student to attend this, and registration is available on our website. We also are running some small group essay and application workshops. These are in person at our center. I'm actually running one next week at our Palm Beach Gardens office. I'll give you the contact information to reach out for that. Again, if you've enjoyed spending the evening with Ellen and me, we invite you to come back next Tuesday, 6:30 p.m. We are going to be hosting a Zoom essay brainstorming session. It is for students. It's going to be held in a Zoom meeting room. So you can turn your cameras on, you can turn your mics on. If you don't want to do that, you can use the chat as well too. But it's an opportunity. Ellen and I are going to lead you through a few brainstorming exercises, give you some time to write, give you some time to explore some potential personal statement topics, or if you have questions about supplementals, bring those. We'll be happy to answer them. So we invite you to sign up. If you just go to personalstatement.guru, you should see a form, and you could just provide your name and email, and then I'll send you the link to the Zoom meeting room. It's going to be on a Tuesday, so I'll get that out by either the end of this week or that Monday before. So we certainly invite you to attend that. And like I said, it's free. It's really nice. We've been doing it for the last few years, and students always find it helpful. For more information on any of our score at the top, things that we've got going on this summer, these are the names and contact information for our different centers here in Palm Beach County and Broward County. You can grab a screenshot of this. And as always, we'll be running webinars throughout the year. Judy Rabinovitz, our owner and founder, will be presenting on Florida's 12 state universities later in the summer, beginning of fall. She recently did a wonderful comprehensive walkthrough of the Common App. So if you're a student tonight who is getting started on his or her Common App and you want some guidance, you can check out the recording to that. You should find it on our SCORE webinars page, and it's time-stamped so you can jump to that part of the application that might be a little tricky for you. Again, our contact information is here on this screen, and we should also be sharing our emails as well. And so I'm going to
Kathy, we have one question in the chat. That's a great question that we can talk about. It says, do you have any suggestions as to how to approach the question of what you will contribute to the college in the supplemental essay or any examples.
Or any examples? Yeah, we don't have a sample essay, but I think I always like, yeah, that essay is coming up a lot more frequently. I know I saw a few of those for last year's supplementals. I would maybe start with what you already know. This would be my approach. And I would say, how do you already contribute to your community? And maybe narrowing it down, like, what's a community that's important to you? You know, is it family? Is it a particular classroom? Is it a sports team? Is it, you know, your religious community? I mean, you know, pick a community. Everyone has some sort of community. What do you do to give back to that community? How do you support that community? And then you can almost kind of take the who you are of today and sort of imagine how you're going to be giving back to your college community. Is there a similar organization that you might want to join in your, you know, potential future college that you also see yourself contributing to in some way? Or is there a brand new community in your college or, you know, intended college that you're interested in joining, and you can take those skills that you've used to make an impact on your existing community / communities and use it there? That would be my advice. What about you, Ellen? Any tips? That's an excellent question. I love that one.
It's an excellent question, and I agree with everything that you said. I would say the same thing. It's in a way, remember that every essay is a chance to say something about yourself, right? So I would say it's like matching yourself to what the college has. It's the same thing that Kathy is saying too. Like, what is it that you're already doing? If you are a tutor or whatever, can you, match it to some organization that they have that you would be tutoring, maybe peers or whatever. And so you get a chance to talk about your experience, but match it to how you would contribute it to them. Or it also can come down to, I've seen people talk about, like you said, your community. If you're Jewish maybe, and you hold a Passover dinner or Seder, that maybe that's something that you want to create in the college to bring community together. So there's all kinds of ways, but start with what you know about yourself. Exactly what Kathy said. That's what I would say. And find how it matches up with the school.
Great. And I'm just scrolling through the chat because I was viewing the presentation the whole time. And I see Karen asked which schools use their own common app. So you're going to see MIT, Georgetown, University of California, so UCLA, Berkeley, UC San Diego, they have their own UC platform, and then Cal State as well. And I'm sure there are others. Those are probably the most common ones and the most popular with students that we work with. And they have their own essays. And many times you can use some of what you're already working on for a Common App school can be used to write those colleges' own essays. I always tell students, no writing is wasted writing. You can always reuse it. Let's see. And then, will this be available on your site at a later time? Yes, we'll make the recording available. It'll be on SCORE webinars, so you can watch it again and again. And if you wanted to hear those essays again that Ellen and I read earlier, you can see them there. We won't send out the slide deck, but we will always have this recording available right on our website. And let's see. I know.
Question at the end, can you talk, I guess, about deceased family members? Is it too dark? Okay. And I would say absolutely, you can talk about it. It depends how you talk about it, but a lot of people talk about people they've lost. And remember always to make the essay about you. Mm-hmm. So even though you're talking about your family member, what is it about that family member that, how did they influence you, or, and make you who you are today? And I don't know what Kathy would add about that.
Yeah, I would 100% echo what Ellen said. Yes, it's perfectly fine. And again, it's the approach. And I've also read nice essays where the student has spoken or used, that loved one or what that experience was like. But it ultimately goes into about the student, about your experience, maybe how you've carried. I saw an essay, and it's pretty recent, and I'm not going to give away any details, but the student was writing about a lost family member and just picked little moments where they saw themselves kind of carrying forward that loved one's memory and talents, but it was, again, it was about the student, and it was beautifully done. I mean, it made me cry when I read it, and it was positive, and it was uplifting, but it was also very poignant, and it was very sincere, and it wasn't like the student was fishing to say, oh, please feel bad for me, have pity on me. No, it was again about the student, and it was done very, very well. And this might be an essay too. Again, you'll revise your essays many, many times, but this might be one, since it might be a little bit more sensitive subject matter, is do bounce it off when you get the essay written, share it with someone, just to get their take and make sure it doesn't kind of get stuck, like in a darker place, as the
Mhm.
poster just noted.
Mhm.
Let's see. And I think we have come to the end of the questions. So thank you all for attending. Hope to see some of you in next week's essay brainstorming session. You'll get me and Ellen again, and we'll be able to see you if you want to, and you can ask your questions directly. And one thing I forgot to mention, while this, of course, like all of our webinars, is being recording, next week's brainstorming session, we don't record. So that way, if students want to talk a little bit more specifically about their essay ideas or any challenges that they're facing with their writing, they can feel free to do so. We're not going to record it. So it'll just be done in a meeting style. So we hope to see you all. Well, thank you so much for